Last Day on Earth just revamped Sector 7 again, and this time it is more than just a grind fest. But in addition to making great changes to Sector 7, Kefir is doing a bunch of things behind the scenes that is making me get really excited. For those of you who are not up to date, 3 years ago, Kefir released Last Day on Earth as a survival MMO, which exploded in popularity. After several weeks, or for some of us months, the gaming community started to realize that this MMO did not actually have true multiplayer, but since it labeled itself as a beta in the loading screen and the devs said that multiplayer was coming, we all stuck around to see what would happen. A year later, Last Day on Earth released their first version of Sector 7, which was not only extremely random, as it was not a survival game, and we would randomly get in mech suits and harvest crystals, but it was also extremely grindy, laggy, and not very fun. And then 14 months ago, 10 months ago, and 4 months ago, Sector 7 would experience major revamps, making it a survival game, or allowing us to have clans, or integrating it better with the original game. All of these revamps implied progress, but ultimately left us a little disappointed. This week, Last Day on Earth just revamped Sector 7 again, and while some of you may still be disappointed, especially if you have experienced true multiplayer games like Frostborn, this latest revamp is quite a bit different than the others in 3 ways that gets me really excited. The first one is that they have opened it up to all players. Technically, it is only available to those above level 15, but since level 15 is attainable within a few hours, they are essentially opening up Sector 7 to all players. This change has huge implications because up until this point, Sector 7 has been reserved for those who are incredibly committed to the game. Originally, Sector 7 required all of these materials to unlock, which back then was extremely expensive. Then they reduced those requirements to this, and then 14 months ago they released those requirements to this, and then 10 months ago they released it to this, and then 4 months ago they changed the requirements to a player reaching level 150. These expensive requirements are designed by the devs to limit how many people play so that they can test it on their most committed players without affecting the bigger player base. So by opening it up to all players, this implies that they finally have finished a Sector 7 that they are ready to show the world. So while they have only been doing an update for Sector 7 every month or 2 or maybe 3, now that it is official and everyone has access to it, I have a feeling that most seasons and most updates will have at least a little bit of changes to Sector 7 as they improve upon their multiplayer concept. And then as those players start spending money on ready meals or as they just play the game, as they watch commercials, then the devs are going to be more motivated to keep improving Sector 7. The second part of this revamp that is very different than the others is that they added a new trading system. In fact, they didn't just add it, it is now a huge focus of Sector 7. One of the things that I always hated about Sector 7 is that you can't use these boxes to trade with other people. The items you get from them are locked. You can put them into your inventory, but you can't put them back into the box for someone else to take. And if you die, a lot of the stuff on you just disappears or gets almost broken. So I hated that part of Sector 7, and I never really understood why the devs were being so persistent about keeping it this way until this update. Because if they allowed us to trade in the zones with each other, it would totally destroy the economy that they are trying to do with the districts in the crater. This new marketplace system is integral to Sector 7. In fact, so much so that the clans are forced to specialize in what they are going to produce and trade with other clans in order to really advance in Sector 7. And ultimately, I think this is really clever of the devs, and it seems like based on what we've seen so far, this is going to be a big part of Sector 7 in Last Day on Earth, is this idea of trading. It seems like they have gone away from the idea of PvP. It even seems like they've gone away from the idea of co-op. They only allow 3 people from a clan to be in a zone at a time, so it really doesn't seem like they're even trying to create dynamic co-op challenges. It seems to be more of a game of gaining resources and trading with others to do a few co-op challenges, but those co-op challenges aren't its main focus. The third change that is very different than the others is that Sector 7 is no longer a grind fest. Farming the zones in Sector 7 finally has the original Last Day on Earth feel, where it's not that hard to farm them and they provide a lot of resources for the effort. Furthermore, the zones are co-op, allowing us to farm alongside other people. Being able to farm alongside others creates a lot more energy and diversity as you are farming zones, which extends the longevity of farming as it makes each experience slightly different. This is actually something they recently removed in the Frostborn Greenwood zone, which has been, in my opinion, detrimental to the energy of that zone. I know the reason they did it in Frostborn is because people would attract enemies and then they would bring them over to someone else to go kill them, which annoyed some players, but ultimately those players were being very careless to allow those guys to kill them. I'm really a little surprised that the devs did it because they used to want the green zone to be a PvP zone, and so now not only have they made it, a friendly zone, they're removing any aspect of co-op, which I think is a big mistake because people create more energy. And yes, there's some annoying things where they bring enemies over to you, and I think, yeah, that's annoying, and it can get you really frustrated when someone's being a jerk. But at the same time, when someone doesn't do it, it makes them a nice person and you get along, and so it actually adds to the life of the zone. So I think that was a big mistake. And Last Day on Earth doesn't have as awesome of a system as Frostborn did before they changed it, because they only allow 3 people to a zone, so it doesn't feel quite the same, but it is still better than the current version of Frostborn that really you can only play with your family. And then the last big change that feels very different than other Sector 7 revamps is that they added a progression that creates a sense of advancement in Sector 7. By upgrading your clan's business levels from 1 to 80, you are allowed more workbenches, more locations, more shop slots, more recipes. You are able to unlock so many new things in Sector 7, making your clan more and more powerful. This change adds purpose to Sector 7, which is something that it desperately needed. So while Sector 7 could still use a lot of work before it can compare to the single player version of the game, these changes are awesome and gives a lot of hope for the future of Sector 7. But more than that, if you know some of the other things that Kefir has been doing and connect them with some wild game theories that I sometimes have the habit of doing, we can start seeing a bigger picture of something that might be just around the corner. As many of you who follow my channel know, while Last Day on Earth was exploding at one point, the game is not exploding now. Rather, the game is mostly just a revolving door of new players that Google brings in that love the beginning of the game and then quit once they hit the paywall after unlocking their motorcycle and watchtowers. For 3 years, we have waited to see if Kefir would deliver the multiplayer that they promised so long ago, and while the latest Sector 7 update is still nowhere close, in my opinion, to fulfilling that promise, there are 2 other things that are happening that make me think that Kefir is about to start a new wave of content that will create a rebirth to their explosive growth. The first thing that Kefir is doing behind the scenes that many of you are already aware of is that they have created a more advanced version of their game called Frostborn, which has almost everything that we were wanting in Last Day on Earth. It has true multiplayer, awesome co-op challenges, dynamic skills, and so much more. I've already talked a lot about Frostborn on this channel, so I'm not going to go too much into this, but the main thing that you need to know is that Kefir has succeeded in creating the game that was originally promised, and that they had a plan to globally release that game early this summer. But in addition to Frostborn, we see that one of Kefir's umbrella game companies, Helio Games, has created a pirate-themed version of the game in which the devs are currently testing multiplayer with sea battles, and it is set to release in the second half of this summer. So when I connect the dots between an improved Sector 7, Frostborn's global release, and a new multiplayer game, I am starting to think that some of my old theories are correct, that Kefir has just been using us as beta testers to see our reactions as they create most of their content behind the scenes. Then once they are ready with a well-made multiplayer system, as was their original intention 3 years ago, they will create a new wave of games and updates adding multiplayer to most of their games. However, one thing that they have learned is that not everybody likes multiplayer, so games like Last Day on Earth and Grim Soul will probably get multiplayer added to a section of the game rather than integrating it throughout it. Based on what little information I have, my speculation is that they were planning to do this at the beginning of the summer and that they are now planning to do it towards the second half of the summer. When this happens, I think they will follow the same pattern that they did in their single player version, and that each game will have its own style of multiplayer. Last Day on Earth will be more about selling resources in your shop and buying other resources from others to advance. Mutiny Pirate Survival will be more about sea battles and raids. Frostborn will have it more integrated as in the original tension, and other games will probably have other variations of multiplayer. For those of you who have experienced true multiplayer in Frostborn or watched my free-to-play series on it, you know that multiplayer makes the game a lot more fun, which will attract more people, and it is more fun with friends, which will encourage people to invite more friends, and makes the game stay fresh longer, which can help retain those players longer. If you are unsure about any of those 3 points, just watch my Last Day on Earth free-to-play series in contrast with the Frostborn one. Some of my subscribers noticed that I had more energy in the Frostborn series, but after analyzing it a little bit, I realized that that's just because of the diversity that multiplayer brings to the game. Every time I visit a zone in Frostborn, I do not know what to expect, making the game a lot more exciting. So if I'm right and Kefir is planning to start releasing a new wave of survival games that have integrated multiplayer, then I have no doubt that they will experience a second wave of explosive growth. And based on the evidence that I'm working with, it seems like that will happen in the next couple months. But that being said, please remember that I do not work for Kefir, so this is ultimately just game theory. I believe in my game theories, and many of them have been right, but I don't want you guys to gain too much hope from my theories just in case that I am wrong. 2.5 years ago, one of the developers expressed publicly, or at least it became public, that it was going to take years and years before Kefir will realize its dream. At that time, I was really confused based on how fast they had been developing the game, but now I'm starting to realize what that developer was talking about. So I don't know when Kefir will realize that dream. I've always believed in Kefir that they will in fact do this, and my hope is that it will happen this summer, but I'll stick around as long as I keep seeing progress like I do in Frostborn. Alright guys, see you next time.